The moment a family starts whispering after midnight, somebody already knows the truth. Rain pressed softly against the tall dining room windows of the Ashmore estate, while the grandfather clock near the staircase ticked past 1:13 a.m. Harrison sat alone at the far end of the massive oak table, still wearing his faded denim jacket from outside. One rough hand wrapped around a cold cup of black coffee that had gone untouched for nearly an hour. The chandelier above cast long golden reflections across silver utensils and half-empty wine glasses left behind after dinner, but the room no longer felt warm. It felt staged, quiet in the kind of way that made old houses seem alive. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Harrison slowly lifted his eyes toward the second-floor hallway, just as Isabel appeared near the staircase in a cream silk blouse, her blonde hair perfectly arranged despite the late hour. She paused before descending, checking over her shoulder carefully, as if making certain nobody was awake. Then she disappeared toward the West Wing library. Harrison said nothing. He simply watched. 20 years working construction had taught him something valuable about wealthy people. The dangerous ones rarely raised their voices. Less than 2 minutes later, Thomas entered from the opposite hallway carrying a leather folder tucked beneath his arm. The old family attorney moved slower these days, but tonight his pace carried urgency. Harrison leaned back slightly in his chair as the library door closed behind them with a soft click. From upstairs came another sound. Harrison glanced toward the staircase and noticed David standing motionless in the shadows near the railing. His suit jacket hung loose, his tie half undone, his face pale from exhaustion. For a brief second, father and son locked eyes across the enormous room. David looked terrified, not angry, not surprised, terrified. Then he turned and disappeared into the darkness without saying a word. Harrison stared toward the closed library doors again, while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills surrounding the estate. The Ashmore house had always been filled with secrets. Old money families survived by burying problems beneath polished wood, expensive wine, and carefully rehearsed smiles. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like movement, like pieces shifting across a chessboard nobody else realized was already in play. Harrison slowly stood from the table and walked toward the fireplace, listening carefully. Faint voices echoed behind the library walls. Isabel's calm tone, Thomas speaking lower, then silence, complete silence. Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly as he noticed something strange resting beside the fireplace mantel. A framed family portrait had been removed from the wall sometime after dinner. Only the empty brass hook remained. By 7 the next morning, the Ashmore estate looked beautiful again, which was exactly what made Harrison uneasy. Sunlight poured through the tall dining room windows, catching the crystal chandelier overhead, while Eleanor quietly arranged fresh white roses in the center of the long oak table as though nothing unusual had happened during the night. The smell of coffee and toasted sourdough drifted through the room, while soft piano music played from hidden speakers in the ceiling. It looked like the kind of morning wealthy families paid architects to design. Calm, elegant, untouched. But Harrison noticed the details nobody else seemed willing to acknowledge. Eleanor had placed 7 plates on the table instead of 8. One seat remained empty near the fireplace, the same position where the missing portrait had once hung behind the chair. Isabel entered wearing a pale cashmere sweater and pearl earrings, carrying herself with the effortless confidence of someone who believed control was the same thing as love. She kissed David lightly on the cheek before sitting beside him, then poured coffee into his cup without asking. David barely reacted. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the sugar bowl. Across the room, Ethan leaned against the staircase railing, watching everything unfold with quiet attention. At 24, he still carried traces of innocence, but Harrison recognized the look in the young man's eyes. Suspicion had already entered the room. James moved carefully between the chairs, refilling water glasses, though today the old butler avoided looking toward Thomas entirely. The attorney arrived late, carrying the same leather folder from the night before. Harrison noticed it immediately. Thomas tucked it beneath his arm and offered a rehearsed smile to the table before sitting beside Victoria, whose cold expression never softened even in daylight. Nobody mentioned the storm. Nobody mentioned the library meeting. Nobody mentioned the missing portrait. That silence itself became the conversation. Harrison slowly cut into his eggs while Isabel spoke about a charity gala in Boston next month, her voice smooth and practiced like somebody delivering lines she had memorized years ago. David nodded at the appropriate moments, but never once looked directly at his father. Then Ethan finally broke the rhythm of the room. "Did somebody move the hallway portrait last night?" he asked casually. Forks stopped moving almost instantly. Eleanor lowered her eyes toward her coffee cup. James froze near the fireplace. Thomas adjusted his glasses. Isabel smiled politely without blinking. "It is being restored," she answered smoothly. Ethan frowned slightly. At 1 a.m, nobody answered him. Harrison leaned back slowly in his chair as thunder murmured faintly beyond the distant hills again, even though the sky outside remained perfectly clear. The rest of the afternoon passed beneath a strange performance of normalcy that made Harrison more uncomfortable than open conflict ever could. Rain clouds gathered low over the Connecticut hills surrounding the Ashmore estate, while servants prepared the house for an investor dinner scheduled later that week. Fresh flowers replaced the arrangements in the hallway. Silver frames were polished. Even the scent inside the mansion had changed, as though someone had opened every window in an attempt to erase whatever happened the night before. But old houses never forgot anything. Around 4 o'clock, Harrison walked slowly through the west hallway carrying a toolbox James had asked him to bring downstairs from storage. The corridor remained quiet except for the distant ticking of antique clocks and the soft hum of central heating moving through the walls. As he passed the empty section beside the fireplace where the family portrait once hung, he stopped again. Something about the wall bothered him. The wallpaper around the brass hook looked cleaner than the surrounding surface, almost recently touched. Harrison narrowed his eyes before crouching slightly near the baseboard. A faint scratch line marked the hardwood floor beneath the wall, as if heavy furniture had recently been moved. He stood carefully and glanced toward the library doors at the end of the corridor. Closed again. Always closed now. Footsteps approached behind him. Ethan appeared holding a stack of college folders beneath one arm, though his attention clearly remained fixed on Harrison. "You noticed it too," he said quietly. Harrison looked toward him without answering immediately. Ethan lowered his voice further. "That portrait was my grandfather's favorite piece in the house. Nobody removes something like that overnight unless they are hiding something." Harrison rested one rough hand against the wall beside the empty hook. "Families like this do not hide problems," he said calmly. "They bury them." Ethan hesitated before stepping closer. "Do you think my father knows what is happening?" For the first time that day, Harrison paused long enough to consider the question carefully. Upstairs, a door closed softly somewhere beyond the staircase. Eleanor's footsteps crossed the second-floor hallway with slow uncertainty. Harrison finally answered without looking away from the wall. "Your father looks like a man carrying weight he never chose." Ethan nodded faintly, as though he already knew that truth himself. Then both men heard voices approaching from the dining room. Isabel entered the hallway beside Thomas, her expression composed as always, though conversation stopped immediately the moment she saw Harrison standing near the empty space on the wall. Thomas adjusted the leather folder beneath his arm again. The same folder. Harrison noticed the edges of several aged documents partially exposed inside it. One page carried a visible gold seal stamped near the bottom corner. Isabel smiled politely. "The restoration company should have the portrait returned by Friday," she said smoothly. Harrison studied her face for several silent seconds before replying. "Interesting." Isabel tilted her head slightly. "What is?" Harrison glanced once toward the floor scratch marks beneath the wall. Most restoration companies do not leave drag marks on hardwood. The hallway became perfectly silent. That evening the temperature dropped nearly 15 degrees, and cold fog rolled across the Ashmore property until the massive estate looked more like a memory than a home. Harrison sat alone on the back terrace beneath a dim brass lantern while distant wind moved through the pine trees surrounding the property. From outside, the mansion appeared flawless. Warm golden light glowed through tall windows. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished floors. Somewhere inside, soft jazz music drifted faintly through hidden speakers. But Harrison had spent enough years around construction sites to understand structural damage. The dangerous cracks were usually hidden beneath the surface long before anybody noticed the collapse. The terrace door opened quietly behind him. Ethan stepped outside wearing a dark wool coat with both hands buried deep inside the pockets. For a moment, neither man spoke. Ethan finally leaned against the stone railing overlooking the valley below. "My father has not slept in days," he said quietly. Harrison glanced toward the glowing windows behind them. "Pressure changes people." Ethan shook his head slowly. "This is different. He keeps checking bank statements in the middle of the night. Last week I heard him arguing with Isabel about signatures." Harrison remained silent. Ethan lowered his voice further. "And my grandmother keeps asking James whether certain files have been moved from the study." The fog thickened around the terrace while headlights from a distant car disappeared down the long private driveway leading toward town. Harrison studied Ethan carefully. The young man carried intelligence in the way he observed details before speaking. Not emotional. Careful. Watching. "You trust me more than your own family?" Harrison asked calmly. Ethan hesitated before answering. "I think you are the only person in this house who is not pretending." Inside the mansion, laughter suddenly echoed from the dining room. Isabel's voice rose above the others for a brief moment before fading again. Harrison turned slightly toward the windows and noticed David standing alone near the fireplace through the glass. His shoulders remained tense even while surrounded by family. Then something unexpected happened. David reached into his suit pocket and removed a folded piece of paper, staring at it with the expression of a man reading his own sentence. Seconds later, Isabel approached him smoothly, placing one hand against his arm. David immediately folded the paper again and slipped it back into his pocket before noticing Harrison watching through the window. Their eyes locked briefly through the glass. Fear again. The same fear from the staircase 2 nights earlier. Ethan followed Harrison's gaze. "He was never weak before she came into this family," he murmured. Harrison stood slowly from his chair as thunder rumbled faintly somewhere beyond the fog-covered hills. "Weak men do not build empires," he replied quietly. "But exhausted men can lose them." As the terrace door opened once more, James stepped outside carrying a silver tray with untouched bourbon glasses. The old butler looked unusually pale beneath the lantern light. He glanced once toward the house before speaking carefully. "Mr. Harrison," he said softly, "Mrs. Eleanor would like to see you privately." "In the east sitting room." She asked that nobody else know. The east sitting room had once belonged to Eleanor's mother, and unlike the rest of the Ashmore estate, it still carried traces of warmth untouched by decades of control and appearances. Soft amber lamps glowed beside old bookshelves lined with faded leather bindings, while rain tapped gently against the tall bay windows overlooking the dark garden below. Harrison stepped inside quietly and found Eleanor seated near the fireplace in a pale blue cardigan with both hands wrapped tightly around a porcelain teacup that had long since gone cold. The flames reflected softly across her silver curls, but her expression looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with age. James closed the door behind Harrison without a word and remained standing outside in the hallway. Eleanor waited several seconds before speaking. "Victoria always believed this family belonged to her," she said quietly, staring into the fire instead of at Harrison. Harrison removed his work gloves slowly and rested them on a nearby table. "Families like this usually belong to whoever controls the secrets." Eleanor gave the faintest nod. Somewhere deeper inside the house, muffled laughter echoed from the dining room, but it sounded distant now, almost unreal. "You were never supposed to disappear from this family," Eleanor whispered. Harrison's expression remained calm, though his eyes sharpened slightly. Eleanor finally looked up at him. 22 years ago, Thomas drafted the original trust documents after Richard passed away. Your name was included beside David's." Harrison said nothing. The only sound came from rain against glass and the soft crackling of burning wood inside the fireplace. Eleanor lowered her eyes again. "Victoria hated it. She said you did not belong in the Ashmore legacy. She believed bloodlines mattered more than loyalty." Harrison slowly walked toward the window overlooking the fog-covered gardens. "So Thomas changed the documents." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly before answering. "Not immediately. At first he refused. But Victoria knew how to pressure people. Business contracts, investments, personal debts. Eventually the trust was revised quietly before the final signing." Harrison rested one hand against the cold window frame while processing the weight beneath her words. Not surprise. Confirmation. Behind him, Eleanor's voice trembled slightly for the first time. David found out 5 years later. Harrison turned slowly toward her. That is why he looks terrified every time Thomas enters the room. Eleanor nodded once. David wanted to restore everything privately after Victoria became ill, but Isabel stopped him. The room fell silent again. Harrison studied Eleanor carefully as she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and removed a small brass key attached to a faded red ribbon. Her hand shook slightly while holding it out toward him. "There is something hidden behind the old fireplace in the west study," she whispered. Richard never trusted locked offices. He trusted hidden rooms. Harrison took the key carefully without breaking eye contact. Before he could speak, Eleanor added one final sentence in a voice barely above a whisper. "If Isabel discovers you know the truth, she will move faster than any of us are prepared for." Near midnight, the Ashmore estate settled into the kind of silence that only existed in very old houses, where every ticking clock and shifting floorboard seemed to carry memory inside it. Most of the lights downstairs had been dimmed except for the long amber glow spilling from the west study at the end of the corridor. Harrison moved carefully through the hallway wearing the same worn denim jacket from earlier, the small brass key hidden inside his pocket beside a folded pair of work gloves. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills surrounding the property. As he approached the study, he noticed the door already slightly open. Inside, the fireplace burned low beneath a carved stone mantel, while shelves of dark mahogany books stretched from floor to ceiling. Richard Ashmore had built the room decades earlier as a place for business negotiations away from the rest of the family. Harrison remembered that much. What he remembered even more clearly was Richard's habit of distrusting bankers, lawyers, and almost everyone carrying too much perfume and polished manners. Harrison stepped inside quietly and closed the door behind him. The room smelled faintly of old paper, cigar smoke trapped deep in leather furniture, and burning cedar logs. He moved toward the fireplace slowly, studying the stonework beneath the mantel exactly as Eleanor described. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then he noticed one brick near the lower right corner carried a slightly different shade than the surrounding stone. Harrison crouched carefully and pressed against it. A soft mechanical click echoed from inside the wall. Seconds later, part of the wooden panel beside the fireplace shifted open just enough to reveal a narrow hidden compartment. Harrison stared at it silently. Richard really had hidden things inside the walls. Before Harrison could reach inside, footsteps suddenly crossed the hallway outside the study. He froze immediately. Voices followed moments later. Isabel and Thomas. Harrison stepped behind the partially open study door just as they entered the corridor outside. "You should have handled this already," Isabel whispered sharply. Thomas sounded unusually nervous tonight. "The original records should have been destroyed years ago." Isabel lowered her voice further, though Harrison still caught every word through the narrow opening. "If David loses control now, everything falls apart." Thomas hesitated before answering. "And Harrison?" A long silence followed. Then Isabel spoke with calm certainty. "He still believes he was never part of this family." Harrison's jaw tightened slightly, but his expression never changed. Outside, the footsteps slowly faded down the corridor again. Only after silence returned did Harrison step back toward the hidden compartment. Inside rested several aged folders wrapped carefully in oilcloth beside an old silver watch and a sealed envelope carrying Richard Ashmore's handwriting across the front. Harrison lifted the envelope slowly beneath the fireplace light. Written across the seal were 4 words that immediately changed the air inside the room. For Harrison, if necessary. Harrison did not open the envelope immediately. Instead, he carried it upstairs to the small guest room overlooking the north gardens while the storm deepened outside the estate. Wind moved against the old windows with low hollow sounds that blended into the distant ticking of clocks throughout the mansion. The Ashmore house never truly slept. It only grew quieter. Harrison sat beside the lamp near the window, the sealed envelope resting heavily in his rough hands while rain slid down the glass beyond him. Richard's handwriting remained unmistakable even after all these years. Precise, controlled, certain. Harrison finally broke the seal. Carefully and unfolded several yellowed pages inside. The first page was not legal language. It was a letter. "If you are reading this," Richard had written, Then somebody in this house chose power over truth. Harrison's eyes moved slowly across the page, while thunder rolled faintly beyond the hills. Richard described the original trust agreement in detail, including Harrison's protected share in the Ashmore estate and voting control connected to several old land investments outside Boston. More importantly, Richard confirmed something Harrison had suspected for years but never fully understood. He had not simply been included in the family business. Richard had intended Harrison to protect it after his death because he trusted him more than the others. Harrison leaned back slowly in the chair as the weight of the revelation settled across the room. Downstairs, a door slammed somewhere in the east wing, followed by muffled voices rising briefly before fading again. The house felt unstable now, like tension spreading silently through old wooden beams before collapse. Harrison continued reading. Attached behind the letter sat copies of original trust signatures bearing both Thomas's approval and Eleanor's witness seal. Several pages later, another document appeared, an amended version dated 6 months afterward. Harrison studied the signatures carefully beneath the lamplight. Richard's signature looked weaker there, hesitant, almost forced. A quiet knock interrupted the room before the door opened slightly. Ethan stepped inside wearing a dark sweater. His expression tensed the moment he noticed the papers spread across the desk. "I knew something was wrong," he whispered. Harrison folded the documents calmly before motioning toward the chair near the bed. Ethan sat slowly while rain continued striking the windows harder now. "My father just had another argument with Isabel downstairs," Ethan admitted quietly. "She keeps pushing him to finalize some transfer before the investor dinner on Friday." Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of transfer?" Ethan shook his head. "I do not know, but Thomas was there too." Silence settled between them for several seconds. Finally, Ethan looked directly at Harrison. "Are they hiding something from all of us?" Harrison studied the young man carefully before answering in the calmest voice possible. "No," Ethan frowned slightly. Harrison folded Richard's letter once more and slipped it back into the envelope. "They are hiding something from you specifically." Downstairs, footsteps suddenly crossed the hallway outside Harrison's guest room. Slow, deliberate. Then came the soft sound of somebody stopping directly outside the door. The footsteps outside the guest room remained motionless for several long seconds before finally moving away down the hallway with slow, deliberate calm. Neither Harrison nor Ethan spoke until silence settled across the second floor again. Rain continued striking the windows while the old estate groaned softly beneath the storm outside. Ethan exhaled quietly and lowered his voice even further. Somebody was listening. Harrison folded the envelope carefully and slid it beneath his denim jacket. In houses like this, somebody always is. Downstairs, a grandfather clock chimed 1 in the morning through the darkness of the mansion. Ethan glanced toward the door uneasily before standing from the chair. "If Isabel finds out you have those papers, she will not wait until Friday anymore." Harrison studied the young man carefully. "Then we stop reacting and start moving first." Ethan hesitated. "What does that mean?" Harrison walked toward the lamp beside the bed and switched it off, leaving only faint storm light filtering through the windows. "It means tomorrow night everybody sits at the same table again." The next evening, the Ashmore dining room looked immaculate beneath the massive crystal chandelier, glowing above polished oak and silver candle holders. Rain had finally stopped, leaving the windows black and reflective against the darkness outside. The investor dinner was less than 24 hours away now, and tension moved invisibly through the room despite the elegant atmosphere. Isabel sat beside David in a dark emerald dress, calm and poised as she discussed charity foundations with Victoria across the table. Thomas reviewed several folders near his wine glass while Eleanor barely touched her meal. Ethan remained unusually quiet tonight, his attention shifting constantly between faces around the room. Harrison sat at the far end beneath the missing portrait space, observing everything. James moved carefully around the table pouring wine, while soft jazz drifted through hidden ceiling speakers once again. To anyone outside the family, it would have looked perfect, wealthy, refined, untouchable. Then Ethan finally spoke. "Why was the original trust changed after Richard died?" The room froze almost instantly. Silverware stopped moving against porcelain. Isabel slowly turned toward Ethan without losing composure. David's face drained of color. Thomas lowered his wine glass carefully onto the table. Even the chandelier seemed too loud now. Victoria spoke first, her tone sharp but controlled. "This is neither the time nor the place for childish questions." Ethan did not look away from Thomas. "I asked because I found financial records connected to the amendment." Thomas adjusted his glasses slowly. "Estate matters are complex." Harrison finally lifted his eyes toward the attorney. "Not complex enough to require secret meetings after midnight." Silence crashed across the room. Isabel looked toward Harrison immediately, her calm expression tightening for the first time since his arrival at the estate. David stared downward at the tablecloth as though unable to breathe correctly. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly beside the chandelier light. Then Harrison noticed something else. James had stopped pouring wine entirely near the fireplace because somebody had just entered the dining room behind them. Sophia stood quietly near the doorway holding a leather briefcase in one hand, while rainwater still glistened faintly across her coat sleeves. "I am sorry for interrupting dinner," she said calmly. "But I believe somebody here requested legal verification regarding the original Ashmore Trust." No one at the Ashmore table moved for several seconds after Sophia entered the dining room. Candlelight reflected across crystal glasses and polished silver, while the chandelier above cast long shadows over every face in the room. Sophia removed her rain-darkened coat calmly and placed the leather briefcase beside an empty chair near the fireplace. Unlike the others, she did not look intimidated by the silence. Isabel recovered first. She offered a restrained smile that no longer reached her eyes. "I do not remember inviting outside counsel to a private family dinner." Sophia met her gaze evenly. "You did not." Thomas shifted uncomfortably beside Victoria, while David remained frozen at the center of the table, his hand tightening slowly around the stem of his wine glass. Ethan watched everyone carefully, his expression sharper now, more certain. Harrison remained seated beneath the empty portrait space without speaking. Sophia opened the briefcase carefully and removed several folders bound with blue legal tabs. "Earlier this evening," she said calmly, "I was asked to independently review original trust records connected to the Ashmore estate." Thomas immediately interrupted. "Those documents are confidential." Sophia looked toward him. "Confidential documents are not supposed to contain conflicting signatures dated 6 months apart." The room fell silent again. Eleanor lowered her eyes while James stood motionless beside the dining room doorway holding an untouched silver tray. Outside the windows, fog drifted slowly across the dark lawns surrounding the estate. Victoria finally leaned forward, her cold voice cutting through the tension. "This family has survived for generations because private matters remained private." Harrison looked toward her for the first time all evening. "No," he said quietly. "This family survived because Richard trusted honesty more than appearances." Isabel's composure cracked almost invisibly at the mention of Richard's name. David suddenly stood from his chair, so abruptly the legs scraped across the hardwood floor. His face looked exhausted beyond words now. "Enough," he said quietly, though the strain in his voice filled the room. Everyone turned toward him. David stared down at the table for several painful seconds before finally speaking again. "My father never removed Harrison from the trust willingly." Eleanor closed her eyes. Thomas looked away immediately. Ethan inhaled sharply beneath the chandelier light. Isabel stepped toward David carefully. "David, this is not the place to discuss old misunderstandings." But David slowly shook his head. "That is the problem," he whispered. "Nobody in this house has told the truth in years." Rain began falling again beyond the windows as Sophia quietly slid one folder across the table toward Harrison. The original trust documents rested inside beside Richard Ashmore's signed statement. Harrison opened the folder calmly while silence consumed the dining room completely. Then he closed it again without triumph, without anger, without satisfaction, just certainty. Slowly he stood from the table and looked once across the faces surrounding him. Isabel, Thomas, Victoria, Eleanor, Ethan, David. A family built on silence, finally forced to hear itself clearly. Harrison reached for his old denim jacket hanging beside the chair and spoke in the calmest voice anyone in the room had heard all week. Richard was right about one thing. Everybody watched him. Harrison glanced briefly toward the empty wall where the missing portrait once hung. The truth does not disappear simply because wealthy people hide it in expensive rooms. Then he walked quietly from the dining room, while thunder rolled low beyond the dark Connecticut hills, and nobody at the Ashmore table tried to stop him.